thing to add in is to allow me to actually put these tiles onto the map once I've created them. So once I've clicked one of these, I want to be able to click on the map and be able to put it down. So to do that, there's a few different stages. The first stage is I want to know where the mouse is. So I need to get the mouse coordinates. Then I need to work out relative to this grid system, which grid point I'm in. And then I just need to assign that number of tile into it. So remember, these are numbered from 0 to 20. So it goes to say then I can just store that number within each of these points, and then that's going to allow me to draw them in the exact same ways I've drawn the buttons. So first of all, to explain how this tile or how this world map actually works, I'm going to bring up one of the levels that I've created for my game. Now you can see at the moment it just looks like a whole bunch of numbers, but actually these numbers correspond to these tiles. So when I said earlier this has 16 individual rows, so there's 16 of these little grids down the way, well, that's exactly the same way that this is laid out. There's 16 lines going down the way, and there's the same number of columns going across the way, so 150 going across the way. So this matches up with this grid here, and each of these numbers corresponds to a particular tile. In my case, I've chosen -1 to mean empty, not 0. So -1 shows that I have nothing within that tile. But then you can see as I go down, it's actually changing numbers, and each of these numbers corresponds to a particular tile from this selection. So 0 means it's this dirt or this ground tile, and you can see I've got a whole bunch of zeros here, so all of these are my ground tiles. Then 4, for example, corresponds to this tile here, so you can tell that that one at that point is going to change, and so on. Basically, that's what this tile map does. It stores all of the information from this grid into a file like this, which just has all these ones, zeros, -1s, and each one of those numbers corresponds to these images going from 0 to 20. So then when the game actually loads the file into it, it reads this file, reads this document, it goes through it item by item, and it says if it's a -1, it doesn't do anything, but if it's a 0, then it loads image number 0. If it's a 4, it loads image number 4, and so on. And that's how it builds up the entire map just from these images. But before I get as far as saving it as a file, how do I actually handle all of this data within Python? Because there's a massive amount of numbers. It's 16 multiplied by 150. So to do that, I just have a list that contains all of these numbers for me. So let's set up that list now. I begin that right at the top before my main game loop. So where I've got my colors defined, but just above my functions, I'm going to create my empty tile list. So I'll say create empty tile list, because of course you want to start off with a blank slate. So I'm going to call this world_data, and to create an empty list, as before, you just type in square empty brackets. And now this list is going to be made up in 2 layers. So it's actually going to be a list of lists. It's essentially an array, because it is 2-dimensional, right? There's a whole bunch of rows, but then the overall list contains all of these rows. Each row itself is a list. So first of all, I want to create a list of a row. Now, because I have nothing to start with, so all of my numbers are just going to be -1s, I can create a list that just contains a whole bunch of -1s, or going all the way across. So I know that across the way I have 150 columns, so I can just create a list that contains 150 times of -1s. And to do that, that's quite straightforward. We just create a row, so I'll just say r equals a list that contains -1 in it, multiplied by my maximum number of columns. So that's that max calls variable. So this is going to create a standalone list with a -1 repeated 150 times. So just to demonstrate that, let's say print r, run this, and now you can see there's just a list here, and it actually spans over a few lines. Starts off here, and it's just got 150 -1s. So what I want to do now is combine all of those into a master list, because that is just one row. But remember, I have 16 of them. So I need to iterate through all of my rows, create one of these long rows, and add them on. And let's add a for loop to do that. I'll say for row in range, which is my number of rows. For each one, I want to create one of these long -1 rows, and at the very end, I want to add that on to my world data. So world data.append r. So now I'm going to end up with a massive list that contains 16 rows of minus 150 minus ones. If I demonstrate that, I'll just say print world underscore data, and you see what's happened here. Actually, at the end, it's got double brackets because it's showing me that I have a list within a list. So I can scroll this for quite a while, and you see it's just going to be a whole bunch of negative ones. But if I was to output this to a CSV file, it will look just like this, but it'll just be all minus ones. So that's fine. That's now created my empty list, and I can start adding tiles onto it. But what I want to do is basically start off with the assumption that I'm always going to have a ground. So I don't want to just have a completely empty list. I actually want the very last row to be a bunch of zeros, because that's what my ground tile is. And I can access that within my list. So I can just go to the very last row within the list, and instead of having negative ones, I can change them all to zeros. So let's do that. Let's get rid of this bit. And let's say create, oops, not like that. Create ground. I'll say for tile in range. So I'm going from 0 all the way to my max columns because I want all of them to be zeros. I access that world underscore data list, but I need to access only the last row. So I can say rows minus 1, so that'll give me the last one. And then the second index is going to be tile. And I'm just going to set them all to 0. So if I run this code again, oh, actually I need to add that print statement back in. I'll say print world underscore data. Remember, this was just all minus ones all the way down to the bottom. But if I run this again now, I now have a whole bunch of minus ones, but the very last list, you can see it starts here, is a bunch of zeros. So when I come to show it now, which I'll do next, it's going to give me an empty world, but it's going to have a ground running down here, automatically generated for me. All right, so the last bit now is to draw these lists, or sorry, these tiles onto my world map. So I'll add a new function, say function for drawing the world tiles, and we'll say define draw underscore world. So for this, this is going to be a little bit difficult to explain, but basically I'm going to have to iterate now with a for loop through all of these items in the list. So every single one of these tiles needs to be looked at. I need to look at what number is in it, and then draw onto the screen the corresponding image that matches up with that item. Remember, all of my images are loaded within this image underscore list. So all I need to do is find out what the number is, and then access the correct image from that list. So that part's quite straightforward. But first I need to add in a couple of for loops to iterate through everything. So first of all, I'm going to iterate through my rows. So I'll say for, and remember I need to enumerate this because I need to be able to count where I'm at within these lists, because that's going to give me a sort of grid position. So I'll say for y row in enumerate my world data. So as I iterate through the world data list, it's going to give me a variable called row, which in itself is going to be an individual list. But it's also going to count where I'm at. So it's going to start off and it's going to count every time I move on to the next row. And that means that when I come to drawing them, I'll know which row I'm at within this grid. So I know vertically where to draw each one. Now I can iterate through each of these rows to look at each individual tile. Say for x, comma, tile in, I need to enumerate again, enumerate row. And here, I don't want to look for every single one. I only really care about anything that's above or greater than or equal to 0, because remember, -1 is just an empty space. So I'm ignoring the -1s. So I say, if that tile variable is greater than or equal to 0, only in that case do I want to try and draw something onto the screen. So I can draw onto the screen by saying screen.blit, and then the first argument is the image that I want to blit. Now, like I explained, my images are all stored in this image list, so I need to access the correct number of them, and that's already stored here. So if this was anything other than -1, say it's a 0, it's going to take the image that corresponds to index position 0. But now I need to give it an x and a y coordinate. And this is where these enumerators come in handy. So I know that for my x coordinate, this is counting where within the row I'm at. So it starts off at 0, then it moves on to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So this x coordinate is going to tell me how far along within the grid I'm going. So I can use that for my x coordinate. but I need to also multiply by my tile size because this is just going to be individual numbers. It's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3. My tiles are sized in a number of pixels. So if I multiply that by tile size, then it's going to put all of these tiles side by side by the exact width of them. And lastly, remember, I need to make sure this also scrolls when I move. So I add in my negative scroll variable. So that's the x coordinate taken care of. I do the exact same thing for the y coordinate. It doesn't have to scroll, so I don't need to add that variable there. And now let's just make sure that this is called within the main loop, otherwise it won't work. So draw underscore world. So after all of that, we should be able to get a world map. So there you go. I have my little, my little ground set up here. So you know that it's working because my list was basically an empty list, but I changed the very last row to all number zeros, which is this tile here. So you can see now it's setting up with the basic world map for me. So the next big thing to do is to take all of these individual selections, take the mouse position, and allow me to click on one of these points on the grid. Now that I have my world map list created, all I need to do is change the position, change the variable within it to whichever number I'm currently on. Okay, and that's not too difficult. To do this, I'll just break it down into steps. The first one, I'll come just in between where I've got my event handler and checking for my scroll. First thing I need to do, a little comment, is say, add new tiles to the screen. So the first thing I need to do is get my mouse position. Get mouse position. So PyGame's got a function for that. We'll say pause, which is just going to be my variable for storing that position into pygame.mouse.get_pause. So that's going to give me my x and y coordinates on the screen. So now that I've got those, I can convert them into actual grid positions. So we'll say x equals, and then I can access the individual position. So pause is a list, and index 0 is the x coordinate, index y is 1 is the y coordinate. So pause 0 is going to give me the x coordinate of my mouse. But remember, everything is scrolling, so I need to remember to add in my scroll variable. So we say plus scroll. And lastly, divided by the tile size. So that means that, say my tile size, just for a round number, say it's 50 pixels. If my x coordinate is at 150 on the game window, well then that corresponds to tile size number 3. So this is an easy way for me to figure out what tile I'm in on the grid. And now I do the exact same thing for y. I say y equals pause, and this time it's 1, divided by, again, tile size. But remember, my game window overall, if I was to run this again, this is my sort of working area, but then I can't click outside. So my mouse can go outside of that area. I don't want to record those clicks because those are going to be relevant only to when I'm selecting a tile, for example. So I need to make sure that I'm only looking for clicks when my mouse is within this area. And this area is my screen width, remember, by screen height. So I need to first of all do that little check here. We'll say check that the coordinates are within the tile area. If position index 0, which is the x coordinate, is less than screen width, and position 1, which is my y coordinate, is less than screen height, then I know that I'm within that working area. So in that case, I can start looking for mouse clicks. And we'll just say it here. I'll just add a comment, update tile value. And to get mouse clicks, again, there's a function for that within PyGame, which is pygame.mouse.get_pressed. And this has different, again, it's a list and it has different index values. So the left mouse button is at index 0. So when I say 0, I'm basically saying if the left mouse button has been clicked, well then I want to be able to change the tile of that current grid. Now remember, I've broken up my tile position into these x and y variables. These correspond to where I'm at on that world grid, and that world grid itself is my world list, my world data list. So I can access each of those positions. So I can look for what I've got in that position at the moment. Say if world_data, And then in here, remember, it's a list of lists. So I can give it, first of all, the Y index, which is my rows. So it's going to look at each individual rows. It's going to isolate the row that I'm in with this mouse position. And then I can give it the second argument, or the second index, which is the X position that I'm in, i.e. the column that I'm in. So this basically tells me within that particular grid, if that grid value is not equal to the current tile that I've selected from my buttons list, and I've just clicked the mouse button, then I just need to assign that to that point. Oh, I indented that badly. Then that world data tile becomes my current tile. So, okay, I know that's maybe quite confusing to actually explain, but maybe if I run the code, I forgot my column there. If I run the code, what have I done? Oh, this is supposed to have brackets after, it's a function. I'll run that again. Okay, so my X and Y coordinates from the mouse are constantly being taken and constantly being recorded. In fact, I'll add a couple of print statements just to demonstrate them. So in here, I'll just say print. If I print pause, I think that will show me. Yeah, okay, so this is showing me my X and Y coordinates. So if I go all the way up here, it's roughly 0, 0. And as I move the mouse across, the coordinates move with it. But that's not really much use to me, right? Because that's saying over here that I'm over at 778,248. That doesn't relate to anything that I've got. So that's why I divided by the tile size. So now if instead of that I print X and I print Y, I run this, now you can see it's actually corresponding to the tiles. So I'm in tile 0. Oh, actually I should, yeah, so I'm printing X and Y first. So this is tile 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 3, 1, 3, 2, 3, 3. So it's allowing me a way of correlating those mouse positions into a position on this grid. And then of course this grid itself is related to that world map, or sorry, world tiles, no, world data list. So each of these points is also stored within that list. That means that by taking these values here, I can access that exact position within my list and I can change that number. So right now I know that at this grid point, that number in my list is -1 because nothing is showing. And at this grid point, which is 715, you can see down there, 715, the value within that list is 0. So it goes to say then, if I click on anywhere within this list, I just change that value. So right now I'm at coordinate 910. You can see it down here in the bottom left. I'm at coordinate 910. By clicking with this tile selected, it just assigns that position within the list to that new number. I can change that now. So this is my current tile. Remember, whenever I click on one of these tiles, it changes the current tile variable, which I defined. So that's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So my current tile at this point would be 4. When I click here, for example, which is grid point 10, 7, that changes my... Oh, that didn't work. Well, that's a poor demonstration. I've done something wrong. What have I done wrong here? Well, I'm guessing what I've done wrong is that I'm not actually showing the correct tile when I print it. So if I go back up to my blit, yeah, my draw world. Okay, yeah, I made a bit of a mistake here. So when I'm going through my lists, I'm checking that if tile is greater than 0, I need to blit that particular image. But rather than putting 0 in here, I'm supposed to put tile. So that tells me what number is within that particular tile, and then it shows that corresponding image. So let's run that again and change this to the world. Yeah, there you go. So now it's working a lot better. So I can move this around and I can just click them wherever. I can change the ground that I had, but I have no way of deleting these. So that's the only other thing that I need to add in here. So I've already shown how to do this with a left click. I just need to do the same thing with a right click. So I just come down here and add a second if statement. If PyGame mouse.get_pressed. This time the index I'm looking for is 2. So this is a right click. It's not 1. 1 I believe is the middle mouse button. So if the right mouse button has been clicked, then I just want to reset that world data at position YX just back down to -1, because remember -1 means there's nothing there. So if I run this again and just choose these boxes, put these boxes down, and then I right click, and now I can just remove them. Now the other thing I added in earlier was a scroll, so I can actually scroll left and right, and you can see everything stays in its own grid position. It just keeps moving relative to the screen, but it stays where it should be. Although I think there is one check that I didn't add, and that is that I can just keep scrolling off the edge of the map. I added a limit to the left. Yeah, I haven't added a limit to the right. And that's quite easy. I know how many columns I have. I have 150 of them. So where I scroll over to the right-hand side here, I can just add an additional check. So I'll just make sure that scroll is less than a particular value whenever I do this. And I know how many columns I have, so that's max calls, multiplied by my tile size to give me that value in pixels. But then, of course, I still have to include my screen width itself. So I minus the screen width. So if I run this again, and I just quickly shift over to the right-hand side, when I get there, it should just stop and stop moving. There you go. So I can't go past that value, and this is me at the end of my world map. So the world editor, or sorry, the level editor is nearly done. I've pretty much got all the functionality that I wanted in it. I can add in all of these players and enemies. I can pretty much do whatever I need with it. However, there's no way to get this data out of here. So I need a way of saving and loading all this information. Now I already have buttons created, so I just need to create a couple more. And for them, I first of all need to load in their images. So I'll come up here where I'm loading the rest of my images, and I'll load one for my save button. So save_image equals pygame.image.load. Mistyped that, image.load. And then this one is within my img folder, and it's called save_btn.png. So then just remember to, oh, actually that's something that I missed here. So convert alpha, I need to make sure that I add that here as well. So whenever you're loading images, again, I don't know why this isn't an automatic thing, but you need to add it on at the end of your statements here. So the other one is my load image. So load image, exact same thing, but I just changed that to load button. And now that these are done, I've got the images. I need to actually create the buttons from them. So my section for buttons is down here. So I'll just add it in here. So I'll say save_button equals button.button. So remember, this is the button module that I've loaded, and then that's the class that's within it. And then I just need to position them somewhere on the screen. So these are just sizes that I've already pre-picked. I just divide my screen width by 2. And then I had screen height plus my lower margin and minus 50. So I already set these up before. And then lastly, I need to give it the image, which is, oh, not capitals, save_image, that's the button image. And then I don't need to scale them. So again, I'll just use the scale of 1. Let's copy that down. And this time it's my load button. And it's all the same here, screen width, but I need to shift this over. So I'll give it another 200 pixels. And just need to change that to load image. Alright, but now they're not going to come up on the screen until I actually call their draw method. So let's come down here, and I'll just put it underneath here. I'll say save and load data. And for now, I'm not going to take any returns from them, so I'll just draw them onto the screen. I'll say save.button.draw screen, and then load button.draw screen. Just to make sure that I've positioned them in the right place and everything works. Yeah, there they are. So I've got the buttons sitting there, maybe a little bit too low actually. I could increase them up a bit. They don't do anything yet. I haven't added that section in. But before I do, I want to add in some text over here because I need to know what level number I'm dealing with. So I need an output here and a little display. So first of all, I'll define a variable for my level. I'll come up here and I'll say level equals 0. I don't actually have a level 0 within the game, but the reason I have this here is just in case you accidentally click on the save button too early. I haven't added in a kind of like a save warning to say, are you sure you want to override the file? So right now, if you were to click save and you had an existing file there, it's just going to overwrite it. There's no way of getting it back. That's just the way I have coded it. I haven't added in that functionality. So I have added this as a kind of a little safety check that I start off with a level called 0. And it doesn't really matter if I accidentally overwrite that one. But now to actually put text onto the screen, PyGame doesn't have a function for that. You have to create it yourself. So we'll come up here, and I've done this quite a few times in my other games, so you may be familiar with this already. It's a function for outputting text onto the screen. You're basically just going to take, well, type it out first. So draw_text. It's going to take a few arguments. So the text that I want, the font that I want to use, the color, and then the X and the Y coordinates for them. And actually, before I go too far, I need to define that font. So let's go up here and say define font. Font equals pygame.font.sys font. And remember here, the first S and then the F are capitalized. If you get that wrong, it's not going to work. The font that I've used is Futura. You can just choose whatever you like here. And then that's the size for my font. Right, so we come back down to here. And remember to add a colon there, indent. And basically all I'm doing is to draw text, you have to take the text information, the text string, convert it to an image, and then blit that image on. So first of all, let's convert it to an image. So img equals font.render, then the text that I want, true value here, and then text underscore color. So that is created. I can put it onto the screen with that familiar blit function. So I want to blit the image itself, and the coordinates are X and Y. So that's it. That function will allow me to put image onto my screen. So let's go down to the main game loop. So I've got my draw world. I'll add a little section here, and I'll say draw underscore text. So the first thing I want to show is the level number. So I'll say level and space. And in here, I want to add in that level number as a variable. So remember, I've done this before with curly brackets. I just need to put the F down here. So this accesses Python's string formatting functions. So I do that, add in curly brackets, and in here I just type that level variable. So it's going to automatically add it into this string. Next thing was font, then the color, which I'll just go with white. What was after color? Oh yeah, the X coordinate. So I'll say 10, and then the Y coordinate. So I've already specified this, screen height plus lower margin minus 90. So that's going to show my level number. Let's load that up. Yeah, there you go. So show in level, and I just want to show some little instructions to say what to do. So I'll say draw. Actually, I'll just copy this down. Copy that down here, draw text. And now I don't need any of this anymore. I'm just changing it to just a single string. I'll say press up or down to change level. This all stays the same, but I just need to lower it down a little bit. So say minus 60. And there we go. So now I've got this information. Of course, I haven't actually coded that in. Pressing up and down does nothing yet. I want to be able to increase and decrease the level variable. So maybe let's do that first before adding in the save and load functionality. So that's just going to be done with these event handlers here, just like I've done it before. So pretty easy. Just copy this one that I've used for left. I'm going to do this above it, so I'll copy it twice. So the first one is K up. So if I press the up key, then we'll just say, we'll just say level is increased by 1. So level plus 1. And now we do the same thing for down. And now level is decreased by 1. But of course, what you may notice here is that that means it's going to go into a negative value. Don't want that, so I'll add a little check here to say and level is greater than 0. So only decrease the level number if it's already above 0. So you don't want to go into negative levels. You're just going to end up with silly level numbers. So let's run that again and press up, press down, and there you go. I can only go down as far as 0, and I can go up as many times as I want. Now, I didn't actually need a key up check for this because it's just a trigger. It's just an on and off. So if I hold this, nothing happens. I can hold it as long as I want. It doesn't matter. I just need to trigger the fact that I'm pressing it once or twice, and then it changes